It was just before sunrise in Guthrie, Oklahoma, a calm Thursday morning like any other. The kind of morning where kids get ready for school and parents sip coffee in quiet kitchens. But inside one house on West Orbit Drive, something had gone terribly wrong. By 7 a.m., a teenage girl would make a chilling 911 call. Police would rush to the scene, and what they found inside that bedroom would leave even the most seasoned officers stunned. A father, dead. A home, untouched. And a mystery just beginning to unfold. Who would do this? Why was only one thing missing? And how could something so violent happen, with someone else still in the house? This wasn't a robbery. It wasn't random. And the answers, when they came, would shock everyone. If you're a fan of true crime and criminal investigations, you won't want to miss our new book, The Ultimate Book of Serial Killers: 180 Files of the World's Most Notorious Murderers, now available on Amazon. You can also purchase the PDF version directly from our website for instant download. You'll find the link in the video description and in a pinned comment. Now, let's dive into today's case. It was the morning of Thursday, May 13th, 2010, in the small city of Guthrie, Oklahoma. The sun had just begun to rise over the tree-lined streets. It looked like any other normal weekday. Families were preparing for work, kids getting ready for school, and the neighborhood was beginning to stir. But at 7:52 a.m., a single phone call would shatter the stillness. The call came from 402 West Orbit Drive. On the line was 15-year-old Kali Fryer. Her voice was shaky and panicked. Words tumbled out in confusion, some barely coherent. But one thing was clear: something terrible had happened inside the house. Kali had just found her father, 50-year-old Louis Fryer, dead in his bedroom. What she walked in on was something no child should ever see. When officers arrived at the scene, they entered what looked like the aftermath of a violent home invasion. Furniture was overturned, drawers pulled out, and Louis's car was missing from the driveway. Inside the bedroom, the scene was nothing short of horrific. Blood was everywhere, on the bed, the walls, the floors, the door. It was clear that Louis had fought hard for his life. He had multiple stab wounds to the neck and back. His arms and hands showed defensive injuries, deep cuts from trying to shield himself. The attack had been brutal, personal. And the weapon? A kitchen knife from his own home. The same one that now was missing from the knife rack. It appeared that Louis had been asleep when he was first struck. The blankets were still tangled around his legs, as if he had been yanked from sleep mid-attack. Blood pooled on the mattress suggested the violence started while he was lying down, defenseless. He never had a chance to react, not until the fight for survival had already begun. Louis was a hard-working, well-liked man. He worked as a designer at a picture-framing company and raised his two children, Callie and her older brother Keith, now 18. 13 years earlier, he had taken full custody after splitting from his wife, Tricia, in 1997. Tricia had been struggling with drug addiction and spent time in and out of prison. But Louis never spoke badly of her. In fact, he encouraged his kids to maintain contact with their mother, even when the court said less would be okay. To his son and daughter, he was their rock, their protector, their constant. Friends described him as laid back, loyal, and someone who could always make people laugh. He loved fishing, loved sports, and most of all, he loved his kids. As police processed the scene, Callie was placed in the back of a patrol car. Shaken and stunned, she answered every question detectives asked. She couldn't think of a single person who would want to hurt her father. "Everybody likes my dad," she told them. Callie explained that the night before had been perfectly normal. They had dinner together and watched a movie. Around 10:30 p.m., they both went to bed. She hadn't heard a thing all night. Her dad usually woke her up for school, but that morning, the house was silent. No sound of him making breakfast, no TV, no footsteps. She went looking for him, and that's when she found the bedroom door open, and the horror inside. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered glass. Investigators quickly ruled out a break-in. The front door may have been left unlocked. There was a small smear of blood on the back door, likely from whoever had escaped that way. It seemed the killer knew the layout, knew the house, maybe even knew when everyone would be asleep. As in all murder investigations, detectives looked first at those closest to the victim. And in this case, that meant Lewis's ex-wife Tricia. Was there a custody dispute? Had something changed? At first, she was hard to reach. But when she finally spoke to police, she came in willingly. She was cooperative, calm, emotional, but not evasive. And it didn't take long to rule her out. Tricia admitted that Lewis was a better parent for the kids at that time in her life. She was thankful for the stability he gave them. There was no bad blood, no resentment, no motive. Investigators would have to look elsewhere. As investigators dug deeper, a new detail came to light, one that could shift the focus of the case. Callie told detectives something important. Just a few days before the murder, her older brother, 18-year-old Keith, had packed up and left the house. There had been a fight, one that started at school and ended at home. Keith had gotten into a physical altercation with another student. When their father, Lewis, found out, he was deeply disappointed. He had always made it clear, once they turned 18, they were adults, and that meant taking responsibility. Getting into a fight wasn't something he would tolerate anymore. He told Keith it was time to leave. Keith had gone to stay with a friend, but everyone around them knew it wasn't permanent. Lewis had made it clear he still loved his son. He just needed him to own up to his actions. If Keith was willing to take responsibility and avoid trouble, he'd be welcomed back with open arms. Still, detectives had to consider the possibility. Could this tension have led to something darker? Detectives headed to the school and quietly pulled Keith out of class. Inside the principal's office, they broke the news. His dad was gone. Keith's reaction was instant and raw. He didn't believe it. He started yelling that it wasn't true. Within moments, he flew into a rage, throwing a chair against the wall, breaking down in tears. His grief was overwhelming. He was devastated, especially knowing the last time they'd spoken, they'd left things on bad terms. But investigators quickly ruled him out. Multiple friends confirmed he'd been with them all night. He hadn't been anywhere near the house in days. Attention then turned to Lewis's missing vehicle. An alert was sent out. The clock was ticking. 8 hours had already passed since it disappeared. The trail was going cold. Police canvassed nearby neighborhoods, hoping someone had seen something. They spoke to friends, neighbors, co-workers, anyone who knew the Fryer family. The same answer came up again and again. Lewis didn't have enemies. He didn't fight with people. He was well liked at work and in the community. No known grudges, no red flags, which only made things more confusing. The scene at the house didn't scream robbery. Nothing had been stolen. No electronics, no valuables, not even cash. The only thing missing was the car. And even that, detectives suspected, was just a means to escape, not the motive. That's when two of Callie's friends came forward. They had something to say, and it would change everything. They told detectives that Callie hadn't exactly been the quiet, polite girl most people thought she was. In recent years, she had started spiraling, drinking heavily, experimenting with drugs, hosting wild parties at the house when her dad wasn't around. She was constantly in trouble. She had been expelled more than once and hadn't been to school for months. Lewis had tried to set boundaries. He was tightening curfews, laying down rules, trying to regain some control. But Callie wasn't having it. Their relationship had grown toxic. When police searched her bedroom, they found her diary. What it contained sent a chill down their spines. Entry after entry showed her anger toward her father, her resentment, the hate that had built up. One line in particular stood out: "You're dead to me." She had convinced herself that living with her mother would mean freedom. No rules, no discipline, just a blank check to do whatever she wanted. But her dad wasn't going to let that happen. And yet, for all the tension between them, there was one thing that continued to bother investigators. How had Calais slept through it all? The murder had been loud. There had been a fight. Objects knocked over. Blood everywhere. Her father, likely shouting in pain. And then, someone stealing the car and driving off. And still, she heard nothing? It didn't add up. Her brother Keith said he couldn't shake the feeling either. Something didn't sit right with him. He remembered the moment he saw Callie again, when she and their mother picked him up from school after their dad's death. He looked at her face and just knew she was lying. Growing up, the two had been close, partners in crime, sneaking out together. But in recent years, things changed. Callie had gone down a dark path. The drugs, the drinking, the defiance. He had tried to talk to her about it, but she wouldn't listen. He told police she'd always struggled with her mental health, that she didn't like being told what to do, and that she had a mean streak. When she was angry, she could flip in an instant. There had been trouble between father and daughter for a while, and while detectives still weren't sure she had physically committed the murder herself, one thing was becoming more and more clear. Callie likely knew who did. Then, the investigators discovered that Callie had been secretly dating a 21-year-old man named Jerome Charles Jr., known simply as Jay. He wasn't just a few years older. He was a grown adult with no stable address, no job, and no steady income. Yet somehow, he had become a regular presence in Callie's world. Jay didn't live anywhere consistently. So, to keep the relationship going, Callie had begun sneaking him into her home during the night while Lewis slept just rooms away. Some sources even suggested Jay may have been married at the time, though details of that remain murky. But secrets like that don't stay hidden forever. Eventually, Lewis found out. And when he did, he wasted no time confronting Callie. He made his position clear. This relationship was unacceptable. Jay was never to step foot in his home again. The age gap alone, between a 21-year-old and his 15-year-old daughter, was not only inappropriate, it was illegal under Oklahoma state law. But Lewis didn't stop there. The very next day, he found Jay wandering around the neighborhood and confronted him face to face. There was no mistaking Lewis's message. Jay wasn't welcome, and the relationship had to end. Period. Now, for the investigators, that confrontation raised a dangerous possibility. With the threat of legal consequences looming, and Lewis standing firmly in the way of their relationship, they now had a potential motive. But finding Jay would be another matter entirely. While the search for Jay continued, police finally caught a break. The missing car, the one stolen from Lewis's driveway, was found abandoned in Oklahoma City. It had visible damage. The keys were still inside, but no murder weapon, no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing else of value at the scene. Still, it was the first real lead they had in hours. And not long after, Jay himself was located in Oklahoma City. He had apparently called a friend asking for a ride home, said he was stranded and didn't know how to get back. That friend, thinking fast, convinced him to stay put and told him to wait for police. Thankfully, he agreed. Jay didn't resist arrest. In fact, he volunteered to speak with detectives. At first, he denied everything. He had no idea what had happened, he said. He hadn't been there. But that story fell apart quickly. Eventually, Jay admitted he had been at the Fryer house that night. Callie had let him in after everyone had gone to bed. But what he said next left investigators suspicious. He claimed that Lewis had woken up in the middle of the night and found them together. According to Jay, Lewis flew into a rage and tried to hit him with a golf club. Fearing for his life, Jay said he ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and acted in self-defense. But that version of events didn't hold up. Detectives already knew the layout of the house, and the blood evidence told a very different story. Lewis had been attacked in his bed, not in the hallway. His feet had been found near the closet, where his golf clubs were stored. None of those clubs had been moved. They were dusty and untouched. There was no blood trail in the hallway. All the violence had taken place in the bedroom. That meant Jay's version, a sudden hallway ambush, was a lie. When pressed again, Jay changed his story. This time, he claimed he had broken into the house to rob Lewis. But when Lewis woke up, Jay panicked and stabbed him. That story didn't make sense either. Nothing had been stolen. No wallet, no valuables, no electronics. Only the car had been taken, and even that had been abandoned without effort to sell or hide it. So detectives pushed harder, and finally, Jay broke. He admitted the truth, or at least a version of it. Jay said that Callie had been asking him to kill her father for a while. She had begged, she had pleaded, she wanted Lewis gone. And that night, the plan had been set. Jay claimed that Callie told him exactly how to do it, what time to come, which door would be unlocked, where to find the knife, and when to strike. She even promised him that once Lewis was out of the way, they would be free to start a new life, together. And then came the detail that twisted the entire motive even further. Callie had told Jay she was pregnant. That revelation pushed Jay over the edge. That night, after Callie and her father had gone to sleep, she quietly slipped out of her room and unlocked the door. The rest was a plan already in motion. Jay entered the house through the back door, just as Callie had arranged. The knife was exactly where she had told him it would be, in the kitchen. He crept down the hallway and into the bedroom where Lewis lay asleep. Jay said he paused, just for a second, but when Lewis began to stir, that hesitation disappeared. He lunged forward and began stabbing. The attack was frenzied and brutal. By the time it was over, Lewis was dead. Jay grabbed the car keys, fled the house, and drove toward Oklahoma City. Somewhere along the route, he tossed the murder weapon out the window. He would later claim Callie had promised to meet him once he got there, but she never showed. Instead, he wandered through Oklahoma City alone, eventually calling Callie just before 7 a.m. to let her know where he was. Moments later, Callie dialed 911, beginning what she thought was the perfect cover: a fake discovery, a panicked daughter, a flawless alibi. But within 24 hours, the whole thing collapsed. Jay was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Shortly after, detectives arrived at Tricia Wheeler's home, where Callie had been staying. She too was taken into custody and later charged with the same. As investigators combed through phone records, a timeline emerged. Kaylee had phoned Jay just minutes before her 911 call. Her phone also showed that she had been online around 3 a.m., the time Jay later said the murder occurred. She had claimed to be asleep the whole night. The digital evidence painted a different picture. There were numerous calls and messages exchanged between them that night. The times matched Jay's story with precision. Despite this, Callie denied everything. She immediately requested a lawyer and entered a plea of not guilty. The media swarmed the courthouse. The image of a 15-year-old girl accused of orchestrating her father's murder shocked the community and the nation. While in custody, Callie's calls were monitored closely, and it was during one of those calls that a disturbing truth came to light. Callie had never been pregnant. She had lied about it to manipulate Jay, to push him toward murder, to make him believe they had a future, to trap him in her plan. When detectives told Jay the pregnancy had been fabricated, they said he appeared genuinely shaken. It was the breaking point. Jay agreed to testify against Callie in exchange for a plea deal. The case moved forward. Prosecutors now had their narrative. A manipulative teenager who convinced her older boyfriend to carry out the unthinkable. Callie's mother, Tricia, stood by her daughter. She told reporters that Callie was innocent, that she knew her daughter well enough to tell when she was lying. She believed this was all Jay's doing. But Jay, now standing in court, told the judge that Callie had left the door unlocked, told him where to find the knife, and planned everything in advance. Callie's defense argued that there was no forensic evidence linking her to the murder, no fingerprints, no blood, no DNA, just Jay's word, and a web of texts and calls. But for the judge, that was enough to move forward. Callie would be tried as an adult. Jay pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in July 2010. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. In May 2011, Callie Fryer, now 16 years old, stood trial. She still maintained her innocence, but the jury didn't believe her. She was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. In Oklahoma, a life sentence with parole means 45 years. Callie won't be eligible until she's 61 years old. Jay won't see a parole board until the year 2077. By then, he'll be nearly 90. As her sentence was read, Callie didn't look toward her family in the courtroom. Once a blonde teenager, now her appearance had changed. She showed little emotion until the end. Only then did a few quiet tears fall. Her attorney expressed concern that a 15-year-old girl would spend her life in prison among adults decades older. Callie's family refused to speak publicly. They said only this: for the first time since Lewis's murder, they could finally feel safe, at least for a while. Some friends and family were relieved. They said Callie had a dark side, and now she couldn't hurt anyone else. But others felt her sentence was excessive. They believed Jay, the adult in the situation, should have received more blame. Tricia, Callie's mother, continued to insist her daughter had been wrongly accused. Keith, Callie's older brother, struggled to make sense of everything. He went to therapy. He started drinking. He questioned everything. She was just 15. Did she really understand what she'd done? Was she caught up in a fantasy? Did she even believe it would happen? But what haunted him most was the fact that she hadn't stopped it. That she lay awake in that house, knowing what was coming, and let it happen anyway. That kind of coldness, he said, was hard to understand. And yet, despite it all, he still answered her calls. He hadn't visited. But he picked up the phone when she called from prison, because that's what their dad would have wanted. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.
Your false emergency.
Hi, you guys have been out to my house twice today, and then most recently the deputy talked my wife into letting me in the house, and then she locked me in the garage, and I tried to break my arm when I was trying to get back inside.
What's your address, sir?
6184 Kenks, Kenks Drive. She's currently got me locked in the garage because earlier she broke both of the big doors, and when I tried to...
What was that?
You just shot me!
Born in May 1987 in the United States, Bree Kuhn spent her early years in the care of her parents and older brother, Eric Jr. While her exact birthplace remains unconfirmed, records indicate the family lived in Pennsylvania before the parents' eventual divorce. After the separation, Bree and her brother relocated to Texas with their mother, whose name has not been publicly disclosed. As shared by Eric Jr., when he reached ninth grade, Bree left Texas to live with their father, Eric, in New York. At that time, Eric had begun a new life with a woman named Karen. Despite the distance, the siblings remained close, reuniting for important moments and maintaining strong emotional ties. Their relationship with their mother, however, was fraught. According to Eric, she was physically abusive, and Bree often shielded him from the worst of it. She took on a protective older sibling role, enduring punishment herself to defend her younger brother. These formative experiences left a lasting impact. During her teenage years, Bree began grappling with depression and anxiety. By age 13, she had attempted to take her own life. Despite these challenges, she pursued education through 2 community colleges and, still in her youth, enlisted in the U.S. Navy. Over a 17-year career, Bree served in various naval stations across the country. In 2009, Bree gave birth to her first daughter, Kaylee, with her then-partner James. Their relationship eventually ended, and Bree retained custody, while James had visitation rights on weekends. Later, Bree entered a relationship with fellow military member Colin Turner. Colin, born on December 28, 1987, was raised in a devout, close-knit family in the care of his parents Terry and Donald Turner, alongside his sisters Nicole and Rebecca. He was known for his warmth and deep dedication to family. Professionally, he served in the Marine Corps, specializing in explosive ordnance disposal. Before meeting Bree, Colin had married Casey Gottsman in 2009. That same year, they welcomed a son, who remained in Casey's custody after their separation but was still raised with the love of his paternal family. Bree and Colin married on May 29, 2016, forming a new household with Bree's daughter, Kaylee. Colin embraced Kaylee as his own, and she quickly became a beloved granddaughter to the Turners. In April 2017, Bree gave birth to their son, John Patrick, followed by the arrival of their daughter, Lonnie, in August 2018. Colin retired from the Marines after 14 years of service. After retirement, he pursued a degree in electrical engineering through Arizona State University, balancing his studies with stay-at-home parenting duties, including helping Kaylee with remote learning during the COVID-19 pandemic. By this time, the family had settled in Gulf Breeze, Florida, a coastal community known for its low crime rates, recreational spaces, and family-friendly atmosphere. Outwardly, their life seemed stable and supportive. However, behind closed doors, things were more complicated. According to Eric Jr., Bree confided that their relationship had become strained. On one occasion, Eric visited in hopes that his presence might ease tensions between the couple. During that visit, Colin reportedly remarked, both privately and in front of Bree, that they got along because they were both narcissistic psychopaths. Eric also noted that Bree felt overwhelmed as the sole financial provider while Colin focused on his studies and childcare. Despite Eric's concerns and advice to leave the relationship, Bree hesitated. She feared Colin's potential legal advantage in a custody dispute, especially given her mental health history and the financial support he might receive from his family. In April 2021, Bree made another suicide attempt. While speaking on the phone with her brother, she overdosed on pills and alcohol. Eric, realizing what was happening, urgently contacted Colin, who was home with her but allegedly took no action to help. Eric then called emergency services himself. Bree was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility for about 10 days and again a month later for a week-long stay. During her recovery, Bree reported work-related stress and blamed Colin for interfering with her job, which she claimed led to further complications. However, she never publicly accused him of any psychological, physical, or sexual abuse. After her hospitalization, Bree enrolled in an intensive outpatient program and resumed work at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola as an assistant to the command chief, under a limited-duty sailor status that allowed her to continue treatment while staying engaged in her career. In the months leading up to the tragedy, Bree began seeking legal assistance. On Wednesday, September 8, 2021, she reached out to a group of mothers via a messaging app, asking for recommendations for a lawyer. She noted that the situation could turn ugly, as it involved both children and property disputes. But no legal advice could have prepared anyone for what came next. At 12:53 p.m. that same day, Bree placed a call to 911. She reported a domestic dispute with her husband and requested police assistance at their home. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived at the family's residence. The first thing they saw was Colin seated calmly in a beach chair at the edge of their driveway. Colin informed them that Bree had a shotgun and a pistol inside the bedroom. He admitted he also had a firearm stored in his truck. Colin emphasized that Bree had been the one to call the police. When asked where Bree was, Colin led one of the officers to the home's entrance and pointed toward the kitchen. As the officer entered, Bree and Colin's young son approached, curiously asking about the equipment on the officer's belt. Bree appeared shortly after, visibly frustrated. The officer explained that unless there were visible injuries or concrete proof of physical violence, there was little they could do in that moment. Bree responded with bitter sarcasm, saying that next time she would make sure her husband hit her in the face. The officer attempted to de-escalate the situation and informed her that without a court order or restraining order, they couldn't stop Colin from seeing or taking the children, especially since 2 of them were biologically his. Asked whether she wanted to file a formal complaint, Bree declined, stating she only wanted to remove her children from the house. The officer said he would speak with Colin while she packed some belongings. Outside, as officers questioned Colin about any possible physical confrontation, Bree began moving items from Colin's truck into her own vehicle. When Colin realized what she was doing, he firmly stated that he wouldn't allow her to take the kids. He claimed he was the children's primary caregiver and only wanted to take them to his parents' home in Georgia for a few days to let things cool down. He denied any intention of keeping them from her. One officer advised Colin that if there was no violence involved, police could not intervene in parenting matters. The officer also asked if Colin wished to submit a formal report, to which he agreed. Paperwork was retrieved from the patrol vehicle and distributed to both parties. When Bree saw her form, she asked the officer what she should do if her husband hit her after they left. The officer advised her to keep her phone's camera recording as evidence. The officers then left. But just a few hours later, around 5 p.m., another 911 call came from the same residence. This time, it was Colin on the line. When police arrived again, they found Colin outside holding their youngest daughter. He told officers that Bree was refusing to let him back into the house. Bree emerged, attempting to take the child from Colin's arms. Officers intervened and encouraged her to return inside so they could speak calmly. After confirming that Colin lived in the house and co-owned the property, an officer told him he had a legal right to enter the home. Though not encouraging him to use force, the officer emphasized his lawful access. Colin asked the officer to accompany him inside, wary of another confrontation. As they talked, Colin explained that Bree had tried to take the child into the house, but the child had started screaming, not wanting to go inside without her father. The officer asked if there had been a physical confrontation, to which Colin said no. He added that the incident was part of an ongoing dispute dating back years. Meanwhile, Bree told officers they had been discussing divorce and that Colin wanted to take the kids to Georgia. She accused him of physical aggression, stating the earlier police visit had failed to protect her. She also claimed Colin had contacted her superiors at work, possibly making emotional abuse allegations. The officer reiterated that Bree could not legally prevent Colin from entering his own home. He suggested they find a temporary arrangement, separate bedrooms, limited contact, for the sake of the children. But Bree refused, insisting that allowing him in could result in further violence. She again mentioned her prior abuse allegation and expressed concern about being hurt once more. Again, the officer told her to record anything that happened. But Bree clearly wanted more than advice. She wanted protection that the system, at that point, could not provide. When the officer suggested everyone enter the house together, Bree refused. The officer then turned to Colin, who calmly provided the children's information. During the exchange, Colin mentioned Bree's mental health issues. The officer acknowledged this, noting he had previously responded to a crisis at the home in March when Bree had attempted to take her life. He reminded Colin of the same advice given back then: remain separated within the home for the safety of everyone involved. He also pointed out that standing outside in the intense heat with a small child amid biting mosquitoes was unsustainable. Before heading inside again, Colin asked the officer to retrieve his wallet, which Bree had allegedly taken from his vehicle. At the door, Bree met the officer. When asked about the wallet, she denied having it and said she had only taken Colin's credit card. The officer reminded her that a wallet is personal property, not something shared in marriage, and instructed her to return it if she had taken it. In a calm but firm tone, the officer told Bree she had to allow Colin and their daughter back into the home. Bree agreed, but only on the condition that Colin would not harass her or the children. The officer reassured her that if anything happened, she could call them again. As the officer prepared to leave, he returned to inform Colin that Bree claimed not to know where the wallet was. Colin simply smiled, suggesting he'd let it go, but nothing would be let go. Less than 2 hours later, at exactly 6:22 p.m., a third and final 911 call came from the Turner residence. Colin Turner, just 33 years old, had been fatally shot. The final fatal gunshot rang out while the 911 operator was still on the line. On the porch, officers found Bree, then 34, sitting calmly. As they approached, she spontaneously confessed she had shot her husband. She was taken into custody without resistance. When asked about the children, Bree said she had taken them to a neighbor who lived a few houses down. Paramedics checked her over while officers made sure she was physically stable. When asked if she could breathe properly or needed medical care, she didn't respond, so emergency personnel were instructed to evaluate her. Bree was taken to the police station for questioning. The interrogation was slow, fragmented by long silences and frequent crying. Bree managed to recount the long-term dynamics of her marriage. She described Colin as the primary caregiver and said that she felt she had no chance of obtaining custody because of her mental health history. In scattered phrases, Bree explained that Colin had threatened to take the children to Georgia and had physically assaulted her. She said he warned her that if she reported him, no one would believe her because she was crazy. Bree admitted to removing the batteries from the garage door opener to prevent Colin from leaving with the kids. She insisted he was faking concern about her mental health as a manipulation tactic because she had finally decided to file for divorce. She told investigators she had a legal appointment set for the following day. When asked what happened in the moments leading up to the shooting, Bree said her memory was blurry after the second police visit. She claimed Colin tried to get into the house again through the garage, but was blocked. There was still a side door leading inside, and according to Bree, Colin used it to re-enter the home. That's when, she said, she tried to stop him. The next thing she remembered, she was knocking on a neighbor's door, delivering her children to safety, and returning, she said, to help her husband. Investigators pushed for more clarity. They wanted a coherent explanation, something that could make sense of what had happened. Bree offered only fragments. She returned to the garage and saw blood everywhere. Throughout the interrogation, Bree repeatedly asked to call her father. Eventually, she was given a phone and managed to reach him. The 18-minute call was mostly filled with sobs. Her father tried to console her, telling her she would likely spend the night in jail and urging her to reach out if she felt like harming herself again. He reminded her that things could get better, to hold on and find the light at the end of the tunnel. Toward the end of the call, Bree asked if her father could take custody of her two youngest children. He didn't give her a clear answer, only saying they needed to speak with Colin's mother. He also encouraged her to cooperate with a public defender if necessary until a better legal option became available. Bree then confessed something heartbreaking. She didn't know what was worse, knowing Colin was dead or realizing that she was the one who had killed him. A month later, in early October 2021, a Santa Rosa County grand jury indicted Bree Kuhn for first-degree premeditated murder in the death of her husband, Colin James Turner. The prosecution had not yet announced whether they would pursue a sentence of life imprisonment or the death penalty. On October 16th, Colin's family and friends gathered to say their final goodbye at a military funeral honoring his 14 years of service with the U.S. Marine Corps. The American flag, symbolizing his service, was handed to his eldest son, Brody Turner. Left without either parent, his youngest kids were taken in by their paternal grandparents, who embraced them with love, trying to mend what could never fully heal. After 3 years of delays, on Tuesday, September 24, 2024, the long-awaited trial of Bree Kuhn, now 37, began in the Santa Rosa County Courthouse. The prosecution painted the act as a cold-blooded, calculated murder. He methodically outlined the timeline of September 8, 2021, arguing that Bree had deliberately ended her husband's life after a day of escalating tension. The defense took a very different approach. They claimed Bree had been a victim of battered woman syndrome, suffering years of psychological and emotional abuse at the hands of a husband who had become increasingly unstable after suffering a traumatic brain injury in the military. They argued that Colin posed a serious threat to both Bree and the children. Over 4 days, the court heard testimony from a range of witnesses. The jury and courtroom audience watched the full body cam footage from the responding officers, showing each police interaction on the day of the incident. Viewers heard Bree's sarcasm, Colin's calm demeanor, and finally, the chilling 911 call where gunshots were captured live. Every officer involved testified in court. One confirmed responding to a previous suicide attempt by Bree months earlier. Another described the crime scene in detail: the garage, the blood, the body of Colin slumped in a chair, the weapon in its holster nearby. A crime scene analyst presented a series of photographs, helping jurors visualize where Colin's body had been found, far from the home's entry, seated on a portable cooler, consistent with a stationary victim. Shell casings, bullet fragments, and even Colin's phone, still connected to the 911 operator, were found beneath him. Prescriptions linked to Bree's ADHD and mental health treatments were introduced into evidence, as was the testimony of Cray Forum, Bree's supervisor at the Pensacola Naval Station. Forum testified that Bree had been on limited duty due to mental health concerns. He said that on the day of the shooting, Bree failed to report for work, and Colin had called him saying Bree had cut off access to family finances and sabotaged household electronics. Colin also told Forum that Bree had missed therapy sessions and that he was considering taking the children to Georgia. Forum testified that Colin was calm and composed during the call. He offered Colin contact information for a family counselor and later spoke to Bree, who claimed her husband was lying and planning to take the kids unjustly. On the second day of trial, the prosecution called forensic pathologist Dr. Diana Oleski to the stand. Although she had not performed the autopsy on Colin Turner herself, the original medical examiner had died in a car accident before the trial, Dr. Oleski had reviewed the findings and prepared to present the conclusions. She confirmed what the autopsy had revealed. Colin had been shot 4 times, all from behind. The bullets entered between his shoulders and his chest. One particularly devastating shot had traveled from his left shoulder, exited through the side of his neck, and ultimately lodged in his right wrist. The cumulative trauma included punctured lungs, fractured ribs and cervical vertebrae, a ruptured spleen, spinal cord damage, and injury to the pericardium, the membrane around the heart. Dr. Oleski concluded that Colin would have survived for only a couple of minutes following the pericardial injury. When questioned by the defense about whether there was any sign of a broken arm, as Colin had claimed Bree tried to break it during the 911 call, Dr. Oleski said there were no injuries to support that claim. Next to testify was Eric Kuhn, Bree's brother. Eric described being on the phone with Bree the day she attempted suicide months earlier. She told him she had taken pills with alcohol. He claimed Colin hadn't responded with concern when informed. He didn't call for help, so Eric did. Eric added that Bree had long feared losing her children, believing Colin's family's financial advantage and legal resources gave them the upper hand. On the day of the shooting, he said Bree was anxious due to an unspecified surgery she had scheduled and was convinced Colin would exploit her recovery period to take the children. Eric testified that he spoke to his sister several times that day. Her mood fluctuated, sometimes calm, sometimes distressed. During a final call lasting around 45 minutes, he said he heard her arguing with Colin, heard shouting and objects being thrown. Then, he claimed, Bree picked up a gun. When asked how he knew this, Eric hesitated, then said he believed Bree had told him. Eric begged his sister to leave with the kids. He said she didn't listen. The last thing he heard before the call ended were Bree's words, "You're not going to take the kids." Then, gunshots, children crying, Bree's voice repeating, "Oh my God, I killed him. I have to call the police." Yet Eric's testimony faltered under cross-examination. He gave differing accounts from what he had originally told detectives in Pennsylvania, blaming inconsistencies on the claim that his first interview hadn't been recorded, something the detective firmly denied. With that, the prosecution rested. The defense, which had initially announced it would present testimony from a mental health expert and Bree herself to support a battered woman syndrome argument, abruptly changed course. Neither the expert nor Bree testified. No explanation was made public. Instead, the defense called James, Bree's ex-husband, who is also the biological father of her eldest daughter, Kaylee. James testified that on the day of the shooting, he exchanged texts with Colin. He also received a phone call from Bree, who told him directly, "You need to come get Kaylee." "I just shot Colin." When he asked why, she simply said, "I don't know." James rushed to retrieve his daughter. He told the court he had always believed Colin was a great stepfather. Kaylee had spoken highly of him. Due to a hurricane warning, the third day of trial was cut short. On Friday, September 27th, the court reconvened for closing arguments. The prosecution argued that Bree had no visible injuries on the day of the shooting and had deliberately provoked Colin while secretly recording the altercation with her phone and keeping her brother on the line. The prosecution concluded this was the true motive, not self-defense, but control. They said that when Bree couldn't provoke Colin into aggression, she took matters into her own hands, shooting him 4 times in the back, unaware that he was on the phone with 911. The defense countered that Colin had been walking around the home with a firearm and had hidden it in his truck before police first arrived. They pointed to the 911 call where Colin alleged Bree tried to break his arm, something not supported by the autopsy. One defense attorney even mocked Colin's 911 call, saying a Marine should have been able to get through a locked door, and insinuated that others in his elite unit would have laughed at his reaction. Finally, the defense claimed the shooting was the result of police failure to protect Bree after multiple pleas for help. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning with a guilty verdict. Before sentencing, the judge allowed impact statements from Colin's parents. Colin's mother spoke first. She said she was grateful to have her grandchildren and hoped to adopt them officially. She condemned Bree not only for taking her son's life, but for trying to tarnish his reputation. Colin's father appeared even more affected. He said the children were doing well in school and were surrounded by love. He expressed disappointment in Bree's actions both before and after the shooting. Then, the judge issued Bree Coon's sentence. She was sentenced to life in prison. Though this might seem like the conclusion, the story continues. On October 3, 2024, Bree's legal team filed an appeal with the Florida Court of Appeals. They are challenging her conviction and requesting a new trial. Meanwhile, Bree was not subjected to disciplinary military action. She was discharged with a general discharge under honorable conditions after 17 years of service in the U.S. Navy. But for the children, no court ruling or appeal can undo what happened. Still, the questions remain. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Was Bree acting in self-defense, as her lawyers claim? Or did Colin, a man with no prior convictions or history of violence, fall victim to a moment of irreversible fear and desperation? Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. It was the morning of August 25th, 2017. A big storm, Hurricane Harvey, was about to hit Texas. Crystal McDowell sent a quick message to her ex-husband asking if he had enough drinking water for the kids. Then, she got in her black Mercedes and drove toward his house. She had plans that day, showing a house, getting things done, but she never showed up. She never answered her phone, and she never came home. As the rain started to fall harder, Crystal seemed to disappear without a trace. It would take hidden cameras, a child's quiet secret, and a terrible discovery in the woods to finally reveal the truth. This is the real story of Crystal McDowell, and the moment everything changed. Crystal McDowell was born on October 26, 1979 in Baytown, Texas. Her early years were anything but easy. Raised by her parents, Pamela and Anthony, Crystal's childhood was marked by instability. Both struggled with addiction and were unable to provide a stable home. Tragically, by the age of 11, Crystal lost both parents to apparent overdoses within months of each other. Following their deaths, she was taken in by her grandmother and later also raised by her uncle Jeff Walters. Despite the hardships, Crystal was known for her radiant smile, striking blue eyes, and a personality that could light up any room. Driven, upbeat, and adventurous, Crystal became a flight attendant, a job that perfectly suited her spirit. For years she traveled the country, experiencing new places and people. At some point during her journey, Crystal met Stephen Wayne McDowell, a man 7 years her senior. Described as gentle and soft-spoken despite his imposing build, Stephen charmed Crystal. After dating for some time, they married in April 2007. Stephen had a daughter from a previous marriage. He worked as a shipping manager but struggled to maintain steady employment. As a result, Crystal became the primary provider. While she thrived in her career, Stephen remained professionally unstable, creating a noticeable imbalance in the relationship. The couple welcomed 2 children together. Outwardly, their home life seemed harmonious. But behind closed doors, tension grew, particularly around Crystal's frequent travel. Stephen reportedly became increasingly jealous, suspecting her of affairs during her flights, though there was no evidence of infidelity. Friends noted that Crystal cherished her family deeply and prioritized stability, especially given her difficult upbringing. In 2016, Crystal made a life-changing decision. After 15 successful years as a flight attendant, she left the skies behind and joined her family's real estate business. This allowed her to spend more time with her children and provided a sense of permanence. Her uncle Jeff, proud of her decision, welcomed her as part of the 3rd generation in their real estate legacy. Crystal excelled quickly in her new role. Her charm, professionalism, and dedication made her a rising star in the local housing market. However, privately, she confided in close friends that the career change also served a strategic purpose. She believed that being rooted locally would help her secure custody of her children if she and Stephen divorced. By February 2017, the marriage had reached a breaking point. Crystal filed for divorce, citing years of emotional strain. On March 20th, she called 911 to report that Stephen had made threats against her and their children. Authorities treated the situation as a precaution rather than a criminal matter. At that point, there were no custody agreements in place, meaning Stephen still had the legal right to be with his children. Officers tried to reach him, but their efforts were unsuccessful. A few days later, he returned the children, and Crystal decided not to press charges, choosing instead to focus on de-escalating tensions for the sake of their kids. Those close to Crystal say she was doing everything she could to ensure the divorce remained civil. Her goal was always the well-being of her children. Stephen's adult daughter was disturbed by the events and asked her father why he was acting out. He claimed to be enraged over alleged affairs Crystal had during their marriage, accusations that no one in her circle believed to be true. People familiar with the couple agreed the relationship had been toxic for years. Even Stephen's daughter admitted that while she and Crystal got along wonderfully, the marriage had always been volatile. Despite their differences, the divorce, finalized in June 2017, appeared amicable on the surface. In fact, Crystal helped Stephen find and purchase a new home while she worked on renovating her own. However, beneath the appearance of civility, deeper issues lingered. Crystal often asked her family not to mention her plans or outings to Stephen, fearing he would lash out. Even something as innocent as spending time with a friend could trigger him. Although legally divorced, Stephen seemed unable or unwilling to accept reality. His social media activity revealed a disturbing pattern. Shortly after the divorce, he changed his profile photo to an image of a tombstone, then to one of Santa Muerte, before switching back to a picture of him and Crystal. His posts painted the picture of a happy, intact family. Meanwhile, Crystal continued to support Stephen emotionally, checking in with him regularly. He assured her he was coming to terms with the separation and trying to get his life back on track. But his actions told a different story. One of Crystal's aunts noticed that Stephen frequently posted about bringing Crystal coffee in bed and pampering her, as if their relationship was still intact. In a final attempt to maintain a peaceful co-parenting relationship, Crystal planned a cruise with Stephen and the kids, but the closeness only blurred boundaries further. Then, in August 2017, something changed. Crystal, now 37, met Paul, a local jeweler and fellow single parent. Paul was charismatic, driven, and shared Crystal's love for travel and adventure. Their bond was instant, and for the first time in a long while, Crystal felt genuinely happy. Though she told her family about Paul, she asked them to keep it private until she found the right moment to share it with Stephen. Despite being legally divorced, she still feared his reaction. That fear didn't stop her from publicly expressing her joy. On August 23rd, she posted on social media that she had never been this happy and that her heart was full of a joy she never thought possible. "God is so good," she wrote. 2 days later, on August 25th, Hurricane Harvey loomed. Crystal woke up at Paul's house, preparing to face the storm and her responsibilities for the day. At 7:01 a.m., she texted Stephen to ask if he had stocked up on clean water for the kids and informed him she was heading to his house to shelter with them. She planned to visit a property afterward for a showing. Paul's security cameras captured the final known images of Crystal that morning, first in the kitchen, then walking outside in heels and holding her phone as she got into her black Mercedes-Benz. She was never seen again. Later that day, Crystal's uncle Jeff became concerned. They worked closely in the real estate business and spoke regularly. He tried calling her multiple times to inform her that the showing had been canceled due to the storm. When she didn't respond, Jeff reached out to Stephen, who replied with a suspicious text reportedly sent from Crystal's phone at 9:30 a.m. saying she planned to pick up the kids and head to Dallas. Jeff immediately grew suspicious. Crystal never changed plans without letting him know, and her phone was her lifeline. Work, appointments, everything was managed through it. Something didn't add up. Fearing the worst, he contacted the police to report her missing before noon that same day. On August 26th, as floodwaters from Hurricane Harvey swept through Houston, Jeff and two family members confronted Stephen. Stephen claimed Crystal hadn't been to his house for over a week, but his daughter told Jeff otherwise. She had hugged her mother the day before. That same day, a sheriff's deputy visited Stephen's home for a welfare check. When authorities entered Stephen McDowell's home, they found not only Crystal's black dress in the washing machine, but also her purse and handbag, clear signs she had recently been there. For her uncle Jeff, who had helped raise her, it was undeniable. Stephen was involved in her disappearance. But the timing couldn't have been worse. Hurricane Harvey had devastated the region. Many law enforcement officers, first responders, and even district officials were dealing with flooded homes and emergency rescues. As a result, the investigation stalled before it could even begin. Desperate for answers, Jeff turned to the media, hoping to raise awareness and generate leads. But his efforts were drowned out, literally, by round-the-clock storm coverage. With days passing and no progress, he hired a private investigator, frustrated by the silence from local authorities. This move sparked backlash. The local police chief and district attorney strongly objected to an outside investigator entering Crystal's home, arguing that critical evidence could be compromised or destroyed. Tensions between the McDowell family, law enforcement, and even local media in Houston escalated. Refusing to back down, Jeff and Crystal's new partner, Paul, teamed up to raise a $15,000 reward for any credible information. They launched a social media campaign that finally drew public attention. But in the eyes of investigators, suspicion fell not only on Stephen, but also on Jeff and Paul. Despite Jeff's relentless search for Crystal, law enforcement treated him with skepticism. Whispers about his private life, namely his same-sex relationships, circulated in the conservative town of Baytown. Some believed those biases colored the way authorities viewed his involvement. The local police commander even dismissed Jeff's concerns in a national broadcast, calling him overly emotional and an obstacle to the case. Paul Hargrave wasn't spared either. After submitting to a polygraph with inconclusive results, his credibility was questioned. He worsened things in the investigators' eyes by sending surveillance footage from his home to news stations instead of turning it over directly to law enforcement. Paul defended his actions, saying he tried to provide the videos to the sheriff's office but felt ignored, so he took his case to the public to clear his name. And then there was Stephen. Despite his emotionally manipulative behavior, threatening self-harm if Crystal ever left him, he was seen by investigators as polite, helpful, and cooperative. While family and friends described the marriage as deeply unhealthy and marked by control, authorities didn't view Stephen as a potential threat or a man seeking revenge over the divorce. That all began to change on Tuesday, August 29th. As the floodwaters receded, a family friend spotted Crystal's black Mercedes-Benz parked outside a rundown motel, an area flagged during the online campaign. The car doors were unlocked, and the keys sat in the console. Investigators believed it had been staged for theft, but due to the storm's impact, the flooded lot had made the car inaccessible. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses showed Crystal's car entering the motel lot at 6:37 a.m. on August 26, the day she vanished. Just 5 hours later, Stephen was seen on camera at a nearby gas station. He didn't buy gas. Instead, he drove toward the motel, seemingly checking to see if the car remained untouched. Even more chilling, other surveillance captured a hooded figure, matching Stephen's build, riding a bicycle through the rain near the motel that same morning. The clues were adding up, and for the first time, all eyes turned to Stephen, not as a grieving ex-husband, but as a potential suspect in a case that had stayed quiet for far too long. The investigation took a dramatic turn when surveillance footage from a Walmart located just across the highway from the motel where Crystal's car was found showed a man resembling Stephen McDowell purchasing a bicycle early on the morning of August 26, 2017. He paid in cash, and the timing aligned perfectly with the sighting of a hooded figure on a bike near the scene. Despite this damning evidence, Stephen denied any involvement in Crystal's disappearance. Authorities, citing a lack of direct proof, allowed him to return home with his children. Crystal's family was outraged. Jeff, her uncle, reminded the district attorney that Crystal had previously filed a report stating Stephen had threatened to harm their children if she ever left him. To Jeff, the man's mental and emotional instability was undeniable. It wasn't until September 8th, nearly 2 weeks after she vanished, that the district attorney finally intervened. The children were placed in protective custody, and Stephen was brought in for questioning. Yet even then, Stephen dictated the terms. He asked to return home for one final night, to put things in order, and promised to confess the next morning. Jeff and other loved ones were furious. They believed this unsupervised time could give Stephen an opportunity to take his own life and escape justice. But on September 9th, 2017, Stephen kept his word. He returned to the station and confessed. He told investigators that during a heated argument, Crystal informed him she was taking her new boyfriend, Paul, on an upcoming family trip, and not him. She had just returned from spending time with Paul, which enraged Stephen. As their children slept upstairs, he attacked her from behind and strangled her to death. After the murder, Stephen wrapped her body in a blanket, placed it in the trunk of his car, and before sunrise, drove to a wooded area near his home where he disposed of her remains. Even with the confession, Stephen refused to disclose the location of the body unless prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. Given the damage caused by Hurricane Harvey and the time that had passed, authorities feared the body would be impossible to locate without his help. They agreed to the deal. Later that day, Stephen led authorities to a remote, overgrown area. Crystal's remains were found in an advanced state of decomposition. Stephen McDowell, then 44, was charged with first-degree murder. Bail was set at $500,000, which he was unable to pay. Beyond the jealousy and rage, the case revealed a more sobering truth. Without Crystal, Stephen had no means of financial support for himself or his children. Justice, however, moved slowly. The trial didn't begin until June 2019. During that time, Stephen showed no remorse. In court, he attempted to portray himself as a broken man, claiming he acted in a sudden fit of passion, a legal strategy in Texas that, if accepted, could drastically reduce his sentence. He even alleged that Crystal's death resulted from a consensual encounter gone wrong. But the prosecution dismantled this narrative, emphasizing the long-standing emotional abuse and control he had exerted throughout their relationship. Stephen's legal team tried to smear Crystal's reputation, introducing unverified texts and claims of infidelity. But those closest to her stood firm. They painted a very different picture. Crystal was vibrant, caring, and deeply committed to her children. They testified about the dysfunction and manipulation she endured for years. One of the most heartbreaking moments during the trial came when Mandy Avalos, Crystal's lifelong friend and guardian of her children, took the stand and shared something devastating. In December 2017, Maui, then just 5 years old, confided in Mandy that she was ready to reveal her secret. Mandy had no idea what to expect. Gently encouraging the girl to speak, she listened in shock as Maui described waking up the morning her mother vanished. She recalled hearing her parents fighting. She wandered past the bathroom and into the bedroom. There, she saw Stephen push Crystal onto the bed and place his hands over her nose and mouth. Maui stood at the edge of the bed as her mother looked at her, until her eyes stopped moving. Then Stephen turned to his daughter, told her to go upstairs, and warned her never to speak about what she saw. Mandy immediately alerted authorities. Maui was placed into trauma counseling, but the emotional wounds ran deep. Another key witness for the prosecution was Melissa Cherry, Crystal's cousin and close friend. She recalled helping Crystal move out of the home when tensions with Stephen became unbearable, and then helping her move back in when Stephen threatened to end his life if she didn't return. Cherry testified that after the divorce, Stephen continued to manipulate Crystal emotionally, even starving himself to make her feel responsible for his well-being. The day after Crystal went missing, Melissa and Jeff visited Stephen's home. He was pacing nervously, trembling, and crying. Maui told them she had seen her mom the day before, then pointed to a black dress in a closet and said, "The bad spirits took her." The scene was chilling. Melissa and Jeff immediately called the police from outside the home, begging them to remove Stephen from the children's lives, but their pleas were ignored. Melissa also testified about the family cruise Stephen had proposed, a last-ditch effort to stage a peaceful goodbye. Crystal reluctantly agreed, but made it clear, no threats, no manipulation, no harm. As the trip neared, another argument, this time over money, convinced her to cancel. She realized Stephen wasn't trying to say goodbye. He wanted to win her back. Then came one of the most damning testimonies. An inmate who had shared a cell with Stephen revealed that Stephen had confessed in detail to killing Crystal. The motive? A text message from another man. The inmate recalled Stephen saying he used zip ties to bind Crystal's hands after she died, a detail only the forensic team had previously confirmed. Texas Department of Public Safety officials confirmed other pieces of Stephen's confession. He told them Crystal had arrived early on the morning of August 25, 2017. They fought. She told him she never truly loved him and that he needed to move on. In a rage, he strangled her in the bedroom. The 5-day trial ended swiftly. In just 3.5 hours, the jury found Stephen McDowell guilty of first-degree murder. On September 10, 2019, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison. He must serve at least 25 before being eligible for parole, making his potential release date 2042. Crystal's family was devastated by what they saw as a lenient sentence. Her uncle Jeff shouted in court that Stephen deserved worse. Others were frustrated, believing a life sentence or the death penalty should have been on the table. But those options had been taken off due to the deal Stephen struck in exchange for revealing where he had hidden Crystal's body. The family's biggest concern, however, wasn't the length of the sentence. It was the emotional toll on the children. Despite being surrounded by love, Maui and Madden had suffered an unimaginable loss. Crystal had always centered her life around them, and now they were left navigating trauma most adults couldn't bear. By 2020, Mandy Avalos, who had taken in the children immediately after Crystal's murder, was taking steps to adopt them legally. Some sources describe Mandy as Crystal's childhood best friend, while others claimed they had once been romantic partners. Regardless of their past, Mandy remained Crystal's most trusted person, and her devotion to the children was unwavering. Now that you've heard the full story, we want to know your thoughts. Do you think Stephen McDowell received the justice he deserved? Share your opinion in the comments. We're reading them all. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.